and welcome to Wait, It Gets Better, the improvisational storytelling podcast, where every week a few friends get together with their randomly assigned, randomly designed, randomly tailored, randomly handcrafted story elements, combine them together into a movie set so real that you'd think we'd gone to the moon for real. I'm, of course, Levi.
I'm Reed.
And I'm Seth.
And we are here to tell you a story. What story elements did you guys have?
I have economic system.
I have history.
And I have Villian's Sidekick. So I think history should go first, right?
I think so.
All right, Seth, let's hear it.
All right. So this planet that we're on, or that this story takes place on, was kind of seeded to not like seeded where like some kind of ancient alien seeded the first man. Not anything like that. But colonized would be more the idea by a highly industrialized, civilized star roaming civilization.
Yeah.
And so this was one of their colony planets, and kind of like most of that as how it probably would go.
Were they like aware?
Yeah.
Okay.
They knew that they were planted there. They were colonists. They went there of their own accord. However, the kind of galactic federation that they were a part of just kind of was quiet one day. Like they didn't get the supplies, and somehow there was some catastrophe that made it so that they could not leave.
Yeah.
And so because of the way that their civilization was completely set up on needing like only one specific material that, of course, 90% of everywhere, supposedly didn't have. And so it'd be like, for instance, it'd be like North Dakota and South Dakota, for that matter, if anyone is familiar with this, have been very unpopulated for many, many years. They've had such a low population because the water is so alkaline and like you can't drink it. Like it wasn't good.
I wasn't aware that was the reason.
Yeah, like it very sparse, but it was like very like not accommodatable for life in the first world like we would imagine it to be. And so until recently, with the ability to filter and kind of adjust the pH level of water a little bit more easily, it's been fairly unpopulated. Now, of course, with the oil boom and everything, people have gone out there, and with the newer technology and things that people have, it's made it quote unquote livable or more accessible. Whereas before, I mean, there would be sparse farmers here and there. But digging wells over most of the state or the states. The guy I talked to, that his family grew up out there, and it's like his great-great-grandpa. This is how he explained it. But basically, yeah, it was, you'd have some people out there, but it was pretty sparse. And digging wells was not a grand access to water for consumption. So in this kind of thing, they'd go out and they'd find a planet that, let's say, they could adjust the atmosphere, or the atmosphere was livable, and then they would just use what they already had without exactly tapping into, either because they wouldn't or because they couldn't. It wasn't what they were accommodated to.
Okay.
And so most of these colonies, because I mean, you've got a federation, you can zip around the stars in the matter of, minutes or days, and, everything's accessible. However, some catastrophe, I'm going to say that their federation kind of had a meltdown, civil war, left in kind of shambles, and, most of the people that either survived, either didn't quite get in on it fast enough, but kind of the supply chain and the kind of the ability or the fuel and the capability to leave the areas then became very limited, and supplies to kind of continue on with what their civilization had, became very diminished if they couldn't access, the resources that they were accustomed to.
Right.
So in many of these places, in this place in particular where our story takes place, in its kind of ancient history, that's kind of where it was. And like they, some of the people that might have had some ability, to leave and go back to, more civilized place, were able to do so. However, what we're going to go back to, their whole society was, blown to bits. So, I mean, but regardless, most people left with, that took any of the, the StarCraft, and they left, leaving behind, a system that basically had, deteriorated into several kind of class systems, where you had, kind of your peasants, and they were the, like always, the majority of the colonists, people that weren't quite the scientific community. So you had kind of the rich oligarchy, the scientific community, and then kind of the warrior class of people, and then you had just kind of the civilian types.
Yeah.
And what happened is, so as society started breaking down, of course, you've got famine, you've got, different factions, and what you ended up with was kind of the rich and powerful were able to pull some of the scientific community under their wing and some of the warrior class, and kind of set themselves up as kind of this elite, gangster. They were, set up their kind of family dynasties, and then they kind of held on to most of the resources and, went about using their strong arm of influence to basically take whatever they wanted. You had two other societies then that developed from this, kind of the warrior society and then the scientific one, which then all these like three higher societies mingled quite a bit, but over the years went their separate ways into kind of their own thing. The scientific community developed kind of a nation or a country that tried to readopt their understanding of science to recreate what they had by using the materials of this planet. And so what that one kind of turned into was kind of I would say almost like I don't want to say steampunk, but kind of a post-industrial where everything's just kind of smoggy or not quite, let's say, highly efficient, because really they're going at everything with the understanding of, well, we need it to work like this does, and this is as best as we can get, and nothing is quite good enough to like have the same combustion or the same power source. So you've got a high functioning society, but it's very inefficient, but it gets the job done, and it gives creates a job environment for people, miners and industry and such, but never is really able to go beyond kind of this stalemate where nothing that they can use on planet is quite what they are conceptualizing to do. And now it's been so long that that's just how it was. They don't really all their universities and all of their stuff, it just kind of stagnates right there. And then you have what's that?
I was just gonna ask about how long has it been since communication with the home world, so to speak, was cut off? And
I'd say something like a couple thousand years. So it's long enough. So most of that part of their history is like an ancient, so most people, they kind of developed a different idea where it's like, oh, they came from the stars, and they're almost kind of like your base, or like you're on, if you get into some place on Earth where it's like, oh, I'm thinking like Lion King, see those stars, Simba, that's where the great ancestors live. And so kind of like legendizing or mythizing, the true idea that like they knew where they came from. And I'd say like the rich, like the oligarchic kind of people, they have a closer, and I'll get to that in a second, they have a closer understanding that that's what it was, because they've kind of, all of the old technology, they had taken it up right away. All of the old, like all of that stuff, they've been able to hold on to. And
so, okay, go ahead.
And they found a way for it to work. Now you have the one other society, which I would say would be kind of like a Spartan society, where that's where most of your warrior class went to, or maybe they just kind of integrated into the other two, or became semi-leader break-offs and other things. But most of your civilian types that didn't bow down or find a place in one of these other societies, basically reverted back to the Stone Age. Over time, it was so you have some societies on the outskirts that kind of reverted to the Stone Age and are slowly actually working back up from, let's say, ground zero, where it's sticks and rocks, and it's like, oh well, this material, if we heat it up, and we can make a stronger pick. And so kind of unlike the scientific community, they might be coming across some things, but in a more natural, like, okay, here's this material and here we found this. So they've started to come back up through society, but most of it's still very, let's say, kind of either hunter-gatherer in most places, and in some places have kind of moved on to like the Bronze or maybe Iron Age. In their respective
after
ideas.
A period of just adapting, then it was this kind of this sense that, well, we don't really have the resources that our ancestors had, but we just have to make do with what we got.
Right. So the twist to that, so like in the back of my head, I had like this, what was it? And it's been a while, but it was recent enough as far as some things go. We had watched, again, with one of the other brothers or something, I think came over, or maybe it was one of the sisters. But anyway, we watched that Apocalyptico.
Yeah.
So basically, kind of basing a little bit of this on that. So I mean, you have this idea. So I mean, kind of the two different ideas. So like with like the pyramids and stuff being like the ancient spaceship landing things or whatever. So one of the things that the high class had found that kind of held power in their own kind of little end of the world is that the material they needed to power everything was found in blood. And so their society is almost like kind of that ancient like Aztec thing where they do the sacrifices, and they have the whole ritualistic thing where they go out and they kind of just take people and they bring them up, and then they get that. But that's kind of something that then they found in that holds the, let's say, the material that they need to harvest that. So in kind of this world, there's that, kind of high on the mountain, like not Olympus god kind of things, but these, cultures that everyone kind of tries to stay away from, and the smaller, weaker people do their best to hide, but they normally are the prey to these this, let's say, higher society sweeping down and using them like cattle for the fuel of their machines. Whereas the other people, they've got, let's say, rudimentary weapons as we would see it, maybe some musket or bow, arrow, let's say weapons of that sort. But these people, let's say the Aztecs of the world, are kind of like was like Teal, whatever what are they called?
The Jaffa
on Stargate. The Jaffa. Yeah, so they've got like, energy staves and, some amounts, not to its grandeur state where they have tons and tons of it, but they've got, the hovering chariots and the, high class weapons that no one can understand. But I mean, really all of it is powered through their nefarious means. Yeah.
Dude, so that's where we're at, is kind of sitting in our present time.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the economic system is kind of fits in with that. What I called it is rule of law, free market. And this, I've got, strict enforcement of patent infringement and strong protection of personal property rights, and firm enforcement against grafted racketeering that isn't complicit and feedback into the oligarchy. And so what I'm saying is it's free market, but it's definitely a hierarchy. It's a rule of law. So to keep things, the peasants are pretty much left alone. Most of it's minimal intervention and regulation, obviously, because of it's a primitive adaptive system. So the local areas are pretty much left free to manage those things themselves, except when it impacts on the bosses. And then of course they have the warrior class to enforce it.
Right.
So that's the thing. So it's essentially works. A guy can raise his family and find a grove of a certain type of tree that he can harvest the fruit, and there can be some trade involved, or somebody can put up a mill where there's moving water and process the seed grains that someone has gathered, and they can bring it in. And it's a very medieval sort of structure, but it's a market economy, and it's pretty government hands off, except to where they strictly enforce, especially where there's if certain resources are scarce. So that's what I've got. It's a rule of law, free market.
Cool.
Okay.
So you want to hear about the villain's sidekick then? So the villain's sidekick is more so to do with a kind of a leftover relic. It was a manufacturing facility made, thousands of years ago, back when things were a lot different than they are now. But basically it was a method that you could feed in chemicals, specific chemicals and power, and create, they were basically just considered like drone workers, biological in nature, oftentimes faceless. They would just perform tasks. No brain, no higher brain function at all, no thought, no reasoning, but just sort of bodies to do work. I have the imagining that when this planet was first seeded or was first settled on, maybe they were operating under like a post-scarcity system, right? Where they just had these things to do all the mining, to do all the busy work, and people were left to just kind of pursue whatever they wanted. But then when the systems started to fall apart, this thing was just kind of abandoned. The keys stolen, the information on how to make them stolen, but the facility was, huge. So you couldn't like take it with you. And there are a number of these facilities all around the world because, they needed like constant laborers, and you basically put in biological, elements, and you could produce carbon-based life forms that would live anywhere between, 5 days to a couple of years. And it's like create your own character. So if you needed a bunch of really 7-foot tall ones, you could just put that in, and it would just, grow them in pods and implant in their brains the basic realities of whatever, and then spit them out. The question about whether or not they were alive or whether or not they were living creatures was broached tens of thousands of years ago when these things were first invented. And pretty much people got to the place that they thought, no, we don't even let them get that far. Now, the question of what is life or isn't life is sort of up for debate, but this, civilization spanned hundreds of planets, and so they thought that they had kind of solved it and were done. The villain, when he finds this place, basically, figures out how to get it started again, and then is asked for the sort of the base key, a string of DNA that like is kind of the building block, and he uses his own. And this has a couple of terrifying effects. One is the keys that they used to use were heavily modified genetic information that had no discernible origin for millions of years. So when he used his key, it created a much more, how do I say this? Closer to 3CPO, right? Much less just a monster, right? Closer to something that, because the genetic information was much less edited, it created a much more cognizant creature. And so he has these things running 24/7. And, the years that he's had to develop this and work on this, he has been working on making ones that are, extremely muscular, tall. He's trying to work on sort of creating ones that come out of the gate knowing how to fight, because right now they all come out of the gate kind of empty vessels, and he has to like teach them over a course of a couple of years, and then they only have like a year or so of like active use. So he's kind of scouring around. He has his kind of like core group of ones that he has well trained, but then as it gets out, they just kind of turn into these more mindless things. But within like 6 or 8 months, he could pump out an army of 200,000 strong, but he doesn't have any way to teach them or any way to to turn them into something that's useful. Most of them end up just kind of they take to their training a little bit, but then most of them just kind of end up as they get closer to their deaths and their bodies begin to enter the shutdown phase, they just start to kind of go rogue and oftentimes feral, almost mimicking the pictures of things we might consider like werewolves or vampires or something like that. Things that are kind of human but kind of break that place because they're not really fully human, or they're just human plus. That's the villain sidekick.
The sidekick is just this,
the ability to make
yeah.
So it's really kind of, I have this imagining that it's either kind of him, or he's got a small group of people, maybe someone who's kind of a scientist or something, who are currently they haven't taken over the world yet because they still can't train them. They need to like get the information to train them. And I imagine what they're trying to do is get to where the oligarchs are, where they stole and took all the information to get the keys, to get the, genetic information, to get the know-how, the manuals or whatever, the know-how to program these things so they want. Right now it creates kind of a broken version of what they know it could make, that's the villain sidekick.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I have this kind of picture of the villain being, he kind of started out as just kind of like a rabble rouser, but then somehow this thing fell into his lap. Maybe a science person escaped from the oligarch's kind of place, and then the villain didn't rescue him but sort of stole him also. He came to the villain and was like, you got to protect me from these people, I have all this information. And he's like, okay, well you're chained to me now. And he's kind of using him to sort of progressively unlock these things. And I have the idea that the hero is kind of like a monster hunter, kind of like the Witcher, or like a monster hunter.
Yeah.
He kind of
What I'm thinking is a lot of what you had with the, let's say, the warrior class that didn't assimilate into the kind of different levels of society, almost made their own, because I didn't really get on this because I wasn't sure how to do it. But now I think what it is a lot of what you had with your, say, warrior class is they turned into like traveling salesmen,
mercenaries,
just like the mercenaries, but just kind of like not necessarily doing, it's not like they work for anyone in particular. They might come in and work for someone if they needed the money, but lived a life kind of like a hermit, but just kind of off to themselves, because they were powerful in their own regard, but then became like this guy, kind of, they lived out in the wilderness, kind of roughed it, never really settled down. I mean, truly just like that's what they lived for. They just kind of roamed around,
right,
mercenarying when they needed to, for different factions. But I mean, for all these years now, this whole class or like race of people, not maybe at race, but people group, that's been their whole kind of life, is just this kind of constant, like not sojourner, but roaming all over the place,
Right.
never really settling down anywhere in particular, but just like keeping a connection, but not so deep that they've created anything, let's say high or let's say civilized, but like as a people group have stayed, interconnected in their, like training and adventures, or, all these different things throughout the ages, but mostly kind of keep to themselves, like unless they're, training an apprentice that's been sent to them because it's, their brothers, it's like their nephew or whatever is sent to like learn their ways, and then they travel with them. And then, I'm thinking like almost like one of those, like there's like shows or something where it's like they send like the young warrior up to the mountain to train with, the master. And,
Right.
But like that's their whole society, is like these, not like a hierarchy, but like a hierarchy of like these great heroes. And so then you like send, up and coming people to go like travel and learn underneath of,
Right.
one of these roaming heroes, if you were lucky enough to gain his favor to take you under their wing. And
Yeah, I like that. I have the kind of idea that there's like there's like the main city where all the oligarchs live, and then it kind of spreads out from that, or a main capital area, and it's on the edges, the fringes, where our hero is found, as somewhere off in the wilderness, the villain is furiously trying to like get this thing to work, and just sending in these like crazy, mixes of like these crazy different animals, have either of you guys seen or read any of the Witcher series?
I haven't.
Okay. It's this
like
really
an
interesting
episode or two. But
yeah, it's this
from the
really interesting
beginning.
thing where there's these guys, they're called the Witchers. They're called Witchers, and basically they're monster hunters. And everyone is terrified of them and kind of hates them because they're changed and they're different, right? They like look different and act different, and they've been changed somehow magically, but everyone relies on them. So you pay a Witcher to come and, take care of this werewolf problem, but then you kind of have him leave the town as soon as possible because you don't want him around.
And so the villain is trying to develop this industry where he's creating maybe trying out, doing experiments, trying to create a model that would be good for as muscle, as an army, so to speak.
Right.
Then others as labor.
Right.
And it opens up possibilities for advancement where you can develop agriculture to a degree you couldn't, where you could, where you've got labor intensive plants. If you've got some of these drones, then you have people to pick the cotton, so to speak. Whereas it wouldn't be tenable for just a family to try to grow cotton because it's so labor intensive.
Right. And maybe because people are kind of stuck in this classist system, that they even feel like they can't move out of it. So the whole idea of like rising up or moving up is just kind of this broken thing.
Yeah, and then the fact that it isn't a resource-rich environment. This is they're just making do. It's kind of like a faded memory of what civilization was.
Right.
Yeah.
I have this kind of weird idea, and you guys can tell me if it's terrible and we don't want to do it. But my weird idea is that you find out that everyone is one of these things. At least at the beginning, right? That part of the reason why they left this planet, why the civilization didn't pursue continuing on this planet, and it was twofold. One was they needed the resources on the planet, but they needed to basically create, it was too toxic for them to live. So they needed to create, at first it was like a cloning thing where they would make a body and then they could transfer their consciousness down onto the planet, right? And do stuff. And then and so everyone who's currently in place were all the servants, right? Who were created and given consciousness and given, basically brought up as a new race. And so the idea of their blood being a thing that powers the machines makes a lot more makes sense then, because they're a product of these machines. Not, it's been thousands of years and they're having children, which is clearly a thing that was coded into them, but they themselves,
they were made by machines that run on fuel, and so So they themselves are also these same machines that also run on this fuel.
Right, right. Which is why even agriculture isn't very valuable to them, because it doesn't give them as much nutrition as they actually need, you know? And that could be like a weird thing where they kind of like, they eat food, but they don't get energy back. It's like, well, when do they get energy back? Well, they get energy back during the weird thunderstorms, right? That the original civilization kind of implanted, you know, made as part of the atmosphere in order to rejuvenate the people, right? The things that they had created.
Cool.
And so it's like, you know, it's like this kind of weird, people are not only stuck in the place that they are, but they're like almost they're psychologically stuck for sure, but they're almost like biologically stuck as well, right? And this villain is crazy because he knows something's wrong, right? And he doesn't know what. And right now he's pointing his blame at the current people in power, at least to say they know what's wrong, even if they weren't the ones who caused it. By inaction, they have caused it. The fact that they're kind of taking information away from people means that they have in fact caused the problem. That's kind of a thing I was thinking about. But I like this idea of the hero being kind of like a outside of society and people don't really like him, right? Because if you're part of this sort of warrior class, some of the warrior class like enforces the oligarch's rule. So like, you know, they're not all loved just because they're strong. It's like they kind of also represent the oligarchs in some ways. Even if they don't agree with them, they still kind of represent them. What do you think? Is this a good start of a story? Should we continue this one next week?
I think so.
Reed?
Yeah, I think it's got potential. We should go for it.
All right. This is going to be a multi-part series. Thank you so much for joining us for part 1. If you would like to listen to other episodes that we have posted, you can look at them on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio. We're on the internet. We're now on the internet. The internet is now open 24 hours a day. If you didn't like this episode, please send me a letter detailing every part you didn't like at waititgetsbettercast@gmail.com. If you did like this episode, I would say just wait. It gets better.